Hello and welcome. I know this video's late, but this is intended to have been Friday's. More Asian Americans of note. Yeah, this is about Dr. Mabel Ping-Hua Lee, who is a suffrage, Chinese suffrage in the United States. But let's get into this here. Mabel Lee was a suffrage who mobilized the Chinese community in America to support women's right to vote. And because Chinese immigrants were not considered citizens, the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920, which removed voting restrictions on the basis of sex, did not even give Mabel the right to vote. Mabel Lee was born in Guangzhou, Canton, in China, not far from Hong Kong, in 1896. When she was 4, her father moved to the U.S. to serve as a missionary. Lee remained in Hong Kong and lived with her mother and grandmother. She learned English at the missionary school and won a Boxer Indemnity scholarship. This academic scholarship granted her a U.S. visa, and the Ming family settled in New York City's Chinatown in 1905, where she would attend Erasmus Hall Academy in Brooklyn. By the time she was 16, Mabel Lee was a known figure in the New York's suffrage movement, and New York suffragists held a parade in 1912 to advocate women's voting rights. 10,000 people attended the parade, and Lee was on horseback helping lead the parade from its starting point in Greenwich Village. The New York Tribune wrote an article about her before the parade and highlighted her academic accomplishments and her desire to improve the lives of women and girls. She was mentioned in the New York Times parade coverage. Lee started her studies at Barnard College in New York City in 1912. And Barnard College, an all-women's school, was founded because Columbia University refused to admit women. While there, Mabel joined the Chinese Students Association and wrote feminist essays for the Chinese Students Monthly. Lee was involved in the suffrage movement throughout college, and her May 1914 essay, The Meaning of women's suffrage, argued that suffrage for women was necessary to a successful democracy. And it is. It absolutely is. Women are half the goddamn population. It's hard to believe. No, I'll take that back. It's easy to believe that our nation was so fucking stupid. But yeah, the extension of democracy through voting and equal opportunities to women was, she stated, the hallmarks of true feminism. 1915, the Women's Political Union started a suffrage shop and invited Lee to give a speech, and it was covered by the New York Times. Her speech, The Submerged Half, urged the Chinese community to promote girls' education and women's civic participation. Women won the right to vote in New York State in 1917, and in 1920, the 19th Amendment gave women throughout the country the right to vote. But not all women. in the U.S. benefited. Chinese women like Mabel Lee could not vote until 1943 because of the racist ass behavior of our fucking country. This was because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, a federal law in place from 1882 to 1943 that limited Chinese immigration and prevented Chinese immigrants from becoming citizens. Without U.S. citizenship, Mabel Lee could not vote, yet she and other Chinese suffragists advocated for women's voting rights, even though they themselves did not benefit from the legislation. After graduating from Barnard College, she got a PhD in economics at Columbia University, being the first Chinese woman to do so, and in 1921 published her research as a book called The Economic History of China. Again, this shows the ridiculousness in the way the racist underbelly of the U.S. always seems to pop up. Ever since high school, Mabel had wanted to move back to China and start a girls' school. But after her father died in 1924, she took over his role as director of the First Chinese Baptist Church of New York City. She later founded the Chinese Christian Center, which served as a community center and offered vocational and English classes, a health clinic, and a kindergarten. Lee never married and devoted her life to the Chinese community, dying in 1966. We don't even know if she became a U.S. citizen or if she ever got to vote while in the U.S. For a right she may not have even got to use, she fought for. This is why it's always proper to do the right thing. That article itself was from the National Park Service. Now this one is from Columbia University's Teacher College. What you should know about the unsung suffrage and Columbia University Teachers College alum Mabel Ping-Hua Lee. The key figure in the early 20th century, Lee championed advocacy for women's voting rights and freedoms. At 16 years of age, she was known for her significant contributions to women's suffrage movement by advocating for equal education opportunities for Chinese women and children in America. Her bold presence and participation in many suffrage meetings led to the invitation to lead New York City's 1912 suffrage parade, where the Columbia University Teachers College alum famously led the 10,000 member strong march by horseback and was named the symbol of a new era by the New York Times. For years to come, Lee would continue to persevere, using her platform to champion women's suffrage despite facing obstacles around her racial and gender discrimination. Her efforts and unwavering commitment played a critical role in advancing women's rights and advocacy worldwide. Today, Lee is recognized as a trailblazer for the suffrage movement, her legacy exemplifying resilience and an unwavering commitment to gender equality. She was born in 1896 in Guangzhou, China, and her father moved to the U.S. in 1904 to pursue a Baptist missionary work, while she and her mother settled in Chinatown in 1905. She would go on to attend Erasmus Hall Academy in Brooklyn, and her educational path began at Barnard University in 1912, where she received her bachelor's degree in history and philosophy, then joining the Teachers College community in 1917, earning her master's in education administration. She later studied at Columbia University, where she made history as the first Chinese woman ever to receive a PhD in economics in the United States. Yet throughout her educational pursuits, she fervently advocated for women's rights and even joined the Chinese Students Association, writing monthly feminist essays for the association's monthly publication. Yeah, feminism been around for a long time. Anybody who thinks it just started in the 60s and 70s is a complete and utter fucking idiot. Despite her advocacy for women's voting rights and the passage of the 19th Amendment, she was unable to vote herself due to the Chinese Exclusion Act, the first restriction on free immigration to the U.S. from China. However, she continued to champion the fight for women's equality. In 1914, she wrote her famous essay, The Meaning of Women's Suffrage, where she urged advocacy for women's voting rights and equal opportunities. And just 2 years later, she delivered the Submerged Half, a speech she wrote for the Women's Political Union Suffrage Shop, where she stated, I plead for a wider sphere of usefulness for the long submerged women of China. I ask for our girls the open door to the treasury of knowledge, the same opportunities for physical development as boys, and the same rights of participation in all human activities of which they are individually capable. When Lee service and engagement in her Chinatown community was among her passions. She spent much of her youth aiding in her father's ministry at Morningside Mission and supporting organizations like the Young Women's Christian Association, the YWCA. After her father's passing in 1924, she assumed leadership of the First Chinese Baptist Church. In honor of her father's legacy, she founded the Chinese Christian Center to offer services like free health care and English language learning classes. She would go on to spend many years of her later life working with the center. And she passed away in 1966 at the age of 69. And while the Chinese Exclusion Act was lifted in 1943, it still remains unclear whether she actually secured the right to vote. However, she certainly paved the way for women across America to do so. In 2018, the Chinatown Post Office was officially renamed the Mabel Lee Memorial Post Office to honor Lee's impact on the local community. So yeah, and then let's look in Wikipedia here. Mabel Ping-Hua Lee, born October the 7th, 1896 in Guangzhou, China, during the Qing Empire. She died in 1966 in New York City. educated at Barnard College and Columbia University. So yeah, even with all the obstacles she faced, she was willing to put everything on the line to fight for women's suffrage, for women's right to vote, which was achieved in 1920, but she still wasn't allowed to vote because she's Chinese. Just pure and simple racism and xenophobia that is of the American, unfortunately, a lot of American history. It's sickening. She was granted the Boxer Indemnity Scholarship. Boxer Indemnities. I guess that was because of the Boxer Rebellion, which happened 1898, 1899, 1900, in that area there. Yeah. That's when Chinese tried to fight back against the colonization of China by Western groups like the U.S. and Britain. And, yeah. It was called the Boxer Rebellion because they used traditional kung fu in an attempt to fight a rebellion against guns. It's a sad part of history. It really is. But yeah. Post-education. Recruited to be the dean of women's students at the University of Amoy, now Xiamen University. But the death of her father brought her back to New York City to take over the mission he ran. So she did end up going back to China. Position of trust and honor awaited her in China. Had numerous job opportunities, including an offer from a Chinese firm interested in trade from the U.S. to China. And like I said, she was also offered Dean of the Women's Students for the University of Amoy, Xiamen University. That was in the 1920s, but of course she was called back when her father died, took over the mission. And then, of course, 1937, we have the Japanese invasion of China, which, again, disgusting. Most people don't think about all the evil that occurred, but there was some horrible actions that occurred during this time. Yeah. And it continued throughout World War II, and then, of course, with Japan's defeat, China became liberated once more. But yeah. Shaw carried a National American Women's Suffrage Association banner during the parade in 1912, saying the NAWSA catching up with China. Again, a poke at the sexism, racism, and xenophobia that underlied much of the U.S. and still does, unfortunately. But yeah. Ba, 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 ba. Ba, 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 ba. Never married and managed to maintain economic independence. This was a lifestyle only women with higher education could have had during her time. Never went back to her academic studies even after friend Hu Shi suggested her to do so, continuing her scholastic and intellectual efforts. Okay, one said 69, this says 70. But November 2017, a motion introduced to rename the Chinatown Station Post Office in New York at 6 Doyer Street in honor of Mabel Lee. And the dedication ceremony was in December of 2018, a year later. In March 2018, Lee was honored as one of the featured series of women's suffrage activists displayed on Link New York City kiosk in New York City as part of the partnership with the City Museum of the City of New York. And she was named a National Women's History Alliance honoree in 2020, being featured in the New York Times overlooked series obituaries on remarkable people whose deaths initially went unreported in newspaper in September of 2020. So yeah, let's go ahead and drag this down. I want to check something. Ever become a citizen or vote? So yeah. She was, let's see, according to the Library of Congress, unable to gain citizenship due to the Chinese Exclusion Law or Act or whatever, could not vote when the right was granted in 1920. The Chinese Exclusion Act would be repealed in 1943, but there's still no evidence she ever voted. So yeah, I mean, a lot is owed to this woman for what she did for voting rights. Yeah. Dr. Mabel Ping-Hua Lee. I'm probably butchering the name. I don't speak Chinese, even with the little Japanese I learned. It doesn't necessarily translate in the way Chinese is pronounced. But yeah. But we'll go ahead and end this episode here. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing. Ask them to cite their sources. I'll be putting my links and sources in the description box below the video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.